Before we start, make sure to like, hit the bell icon, and stay tuned, because once you start hearing this, you're not just listening, you're already inside it. If two strangers thousands of miles apart wake from the same abduction dream with the same scar, then either it's a coincidence or it's a test. My name is Lena. I live on the 14th floor of a rent-controlled building in Queens, and until 3 nights ago, I thought sleep paralysis was just a trick of the brain. I'd had episodes for years, shadowy figures in the corners, weight on my chest, but this one was different. I wasn't alone in my room. I was somewhere cold and bright, lying on a metal surface. My limbs didn't move, but I was awake, fully aware. There were beings tall, thin, with smooth grey skin and elongated heads. Their eyes were dark, expressionless. I remember the feeling of restraint more than the restraints themselves, and the sound like a low, synthetic hum beneath everything. When I woke, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath, there was a stinging pain behind my right ear. I went to the mirror and saw it. A fresh scar, curved like a crescent, right along the base of my skull. I hadn't fallen. I hadn't scratched myself. But the skin was red, like something had been placed there and removed. Half a world away, Ravi was experiencing the same thing. He lives in Mumbai, works in data security, and deals with chronic insomnia. He posted in a sleep disorder forum, describing what he called the White Room Dream. I clicked his thread out of curiosity. The way he described the tall figures, the sterile air, and most disturbingly the voice that whispered a sequence of numbers. It stopped me cold. I sent him a message. I had the same dream, same beings, same scar. He replied within minutes. We started talking daily, comparing notes. Same room, same voices, same numbers. We even drew out the scar on video, same shape, same size, same location. Neither of us had any history of mental illness, no shared contacts, no plausible reason for this. Just the dream, the scar, and the unshakable feeling that we were being primed. Something or someone had connected us without our consent. And if that's true, then this is just the beginning. Ravi was the first to decode it. He'd always had a habit of writing down fragments from his dreams. And this time the numbers whispered to him were burned into his memory before he even opened his eyes. 12 digits, no obvious pattern, but when he cross-checked them against archived SETI logs out of pure curiosity, he found a match. It was buried in a 1983 transmission, flagged as noise, but never fully classified. A weak, repeating signal, intercepted for just under 30 minutes before vanishing without trace. I had dismissed it. Ravi didn't. I ran the numbers through coordinate conversion software and overlaid them on a star map. They pointed to a binary star system in the Cygnus constellation 1, not known for hosting anything unusual. That's when things got stranger. Rovier's grandfather, a retired Indian Air Force officer, had once been stationed in Ladakh during the Cold War. He rarely spoke about his service, but Ravi remembered an old trunk in the attic. Inside were decommissioned flight maps, a sealed folder marked with military codes, and a journal handwritten, brittle with age. In it, page after page of notes about dream sharing, consciousness, resonance, and recurring reference to something labeled Protocol Isha. Most of it was cryptic, but one line stood out. Signal intercepted again. Different subjects, same frequency. They remember more each time. Meanwhile, I dug through declassified US military research and found a 1980s experiment listed under a vague project called HSD, Hypnosleep, Dream Manipulation. It had been quietly shut down in 1986 after what? A leaked memo called Unstable Psychic Cross-Contamination. The memo ended with a handwritten note. Subjects still responding in sleep. Scars remain. Observation continues. We weren't just connected by coincidence. Someone or something had been studying people like us for decades. Bloodlines, maybe, or neural signatures. But the consistency of our experiences, across continents and generations, couldn't be random. We agreed to keep digging. Separate lives, same purpose. Whatever this was, it didn't start with us, and it wouldn't end with just two of us waking up scared. Something was being rebuilt, or reactivated, and for reasons we couldn't yet explain, we were part of it. The pressure started building just days after we shared what we'd found. Ravi's laptop crashed during a call. When he rebooted, the desktop was blank. No files, no browser history, no trace of our conversations. He ran a diagnostic and found a remote access signature buried deep in the system logs. Whoever it was hadn't just monitored him, they'd erased everything. That same evening, I heard a knock at my door. Two men in telecom uniforms stood outside, claiming they were checking local signal strength. Their credentials looked real, and they had a branded van parked out front. They moved quickly, asking to inspect the router, running cables, talking quietly between themselves. When they left, something didn't feel right. I checked the wall socket the next morning and found a small black device tucked behind the modem, blinking faintly. It was a surveillance bug compact, military grade. I didn't call the police. I didn't want this recorded. That same night, Ravi's journalistic friend, Mira, stopped replying. She'd agreed to help us trace HSDM records through her contacts. Her last message said she was heading to the city archives to pull microfiche records from a declassified Air Force vault. Then nothing. No calls, no texts. Her apartment was empty, her phone off. It wasn't coincidence. Someone didn't want these questions answered. We dug deeper into the files Ravi's grandfather left behind and found a name buried in a scanned briefing memo. Project Nullwake. It appeared to be a joint U.S. Indian operation launched in 1979. The goal: cross-border psychic convergence through induced dream states. The tests stopped in the late 80s. Officially, they failed. But based on what we'd uncovered, they didn't stop, they just went quiet. If our dreams were a result of those experiments, then someone had kept the systems running in the background. We were being tracked. We were part of a legacy we didn't choose. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear something wasn't just observing us. It was managing us, watching for when we'd wake up. And now that we had, the eyes behind the wire were watching back. We decided not to wait. Ravi booked a train north into Ladakh, under a different name, using cash. I flew to Arizona 2 days later, carrying only handwritten notes and disposable phones. We needed to find the places from our dreams' sterile corridors, low ceilings, curved white walls with no seams. He followed the maps and logs from his grandfather's trunk. I followed a decommissioned Air Force site listed in the HSDM files. The silence at both sites was unnatural. No guards, no locals nearby. Just wind, dust, and fences long since rusted open. In Ladakh, Ravi found a hatch buried under loose stone near the old base perimeter. It opened into a narrow stairwell that descended into dry, stale air. He found a control room covered in dust, monitors shattered, but one vault door was still sealed and powered. A single red light blinked slowly above it. Nearby, A case of cryo-storage units lay covered in plastic. They were empty in Arizona. I slipped into a half-collapsed hangar and found a tunnel beneath a false floor. It led to a chamber filled with storage racks and analog recording gear from the 1980s. At the far end was a small audio room. The walls were padded, the mic still intact. On a shelf, tucked behind a stack of brittle tapes, I found a logbook. The final entry, dated March 3rd, 1984, read, "Subjects report identical dreams. Language fragments align. Link confirmed. Emergency review requested. Awaiting next phase." That night, the dream returned. But this time, it didn't feel like memory. It felt like transmission. We were back in the white room, and the voice was clearer. Now male, calm, emotionless. It said, "You are prototypes." I woke, disoriented, heart racing, head pounding. Ravi texted seconds later. He'd heard the same words, the same voice. We didn't speak after that, not for hours. What were we prototypes of? And what was? The next phase, the line between dream and waking life, was beginning to erode. Hallways from the dream matched those in the tunnels. Smells, lights, even shadows. Whatever had started in those rooms decades ago hadn't ended. It had been waiting, and now it was moving again. We weren't sleeping through the dreams anymore. We were inside, them conscious, aware of each other. I could see Ravi standing across from me in the same white room, eyes wide, lips moving without sound. The voice that spoke to us didn't come from any direction. It came from within. "The merge has begun," it said. The walls shifted as if alive, symbols pulsing faintly in the corners. We couldn't move, but we could feel the cold against our skin, the static humming through our thoughts. When I woke, the scar behind my ear was burning. I pressed my fingers to it and felt something hard beneath the skin, something foreign. I didn't tell Ravi right away. I didn't need to. He called first, his voice hollow. "There's something inside me," he said. "I don't think it can be removed." That day, we went over the tapes, journals, logs, anything that could explain what we were becoming. The word interface kept appearing. The older experiments had failed, but the goal had always been the same: create a cognitive bridge between species. The dream state was the only place where it could happen. The scars weren't scars. They were port sentry points for something we couldn't see, something designed to anchor inside the brain and adjust perception from the inside out. We started hearing from others. Quiet emails, anonymous messages, some scrambled calls, all said the same thing. They'd had the dream, they'd seen the room, and they weren't alone anymore. Some had cracked, others had vanished. A few had taken their own lives, but a small number stayed lucid. They were waiting, watching, searching. Ravi pieced it together first. "This isn't about control," he said. "It's about alignment, integration. They're trying to join with us, not take over." I didn't fully believe it then, but I understood what he meant. Whatever had touched us wasn't invading it, was sinking, shaping our thoughts so we could understand theirs. Our dreams weren't just memories. They were blueprints, instructions, and now, piece by piece, we were becoming the thing they'd spent decades trying to build. Not just subjects, not just survivors, something more, something new. They called themselves the Awoken, not a cult, not a movement, just people who had survived the same sequence of dreams and come back, changed but functional. Ravi found them through an encrypted message board hidden behind layers of abandoned web domains. It wasn't labeled or indexed. You had to already know it existed. The invite came with a GPS tag, a date, and one rule. Come alone. The meeting point was a derelict train depot outside Varanasi. Ravi arrived just before midnight. No lights, no signs, just a single figure at the gate who scanned him with a handheld device before waving him through. Inside, there were 13. Others, all quiet, all calm. Some were older, others barely in their 20s. One wore an Air Force badge turned inward. Another had scarring identical to ours, but mirrored left side instead of right. They didn't ask questions. They didn't explain. They just handed Ravi a small data stick and a sheet of paper with hand-drawn symbols, half of which we'd already seen in our dreams. The rest were new. When I met my contact in New Mexico, an ex-lab technician from one of the HSDM test sites, he said something that stuck with me. The dreams are the interface, but the people, they're the system. He showed me photos, dozens of faces, all with similar scars, tagged and logged over 30 years. Some were children of early test subjects. Others appeared unrelated, but all displayed the same neurological pattern: hypersynchronous, REM activity and increased theta wave density. Dream-linked, consciousness compatible. The Awoken had tracked over 200 individuals, showing signs of activation. Not all had survived it. Some burned out. Others disconnected completely alive, but non-responsive. But those who stabilized described the same next step: flashes of unknown language, glimpses of places they had never seen, and the feeling of being drawn south, not metaphorically, geographically. The convergence point wasn't a theory, it was a place. Antarctica. Every location pin-collected from the group formed a pattern arcs, then lines, all leading to a single point under. The ice, a buried signal, an origin. The dreams had brought us together, the scars marked us, but now we knew what came next. The Awoken were moving, and we would follow. Trust didn't last. Someone inside the Awoken was feeding information back to Project Null Wake. We didn't know who or how. But Ravi noticed signs, first surveillance tags embedded in encrypted files, mismatched timestamps, inconsistencies in group check-ins. Then came the raid. Lena was in Portland, meeting with 2 new contact siblings with identical dream sequences and deep memory gaps from childhood. She never made it back to the safe house. The camera feed from a nearby traffic pole caught the last image: 2 men in dark uniforms, 1 vehicle, and Lena being pushed inside. No plates, no trace. They moved her to a black site near Colorado Springs, underground, off-grid. They didn't interrogate her in the usual sense. No shouting, no threats. They attached her to a neural interface and monitored her sleep cycles, mapping the dream state like a live signal feed. They weren't trying to extract information, they were trying to tune her. On the 3rd night, a man claiming to be from the Defense Signal Intelligence Office came to her holding a familiar file. One of the original SETI logs, marked Echo 43. He said only one thing before activating the interface. This was never about aliens. It was about architecture. Lena doesn't remember escaping. One moment she was strapped in. The next she was walking out through a fire exit into an empty parking structure, dazed but unharmed. A contact inside the Awoken someone with medical training her days later. The scar had deepened. The port was no longer dormant. It was active, broadcasting. Meanwhile, Ravi went back to the journal. Buried beneath a ripped-out page was an old cassette tape. He found a player and listened. The voice was his own, but years younger, sleep-talking, fluent in the symbols. His grandfather was in the background, whispering notes. "He's one of them," he said softly. They accepted him early. The betrayal cut deep, the truth even deeper. Ravi hadn't just been chosen, he'd been offered. The awoken began to fracture. Paranoia spread. Every signal, every dream, every scar now brought the same question. Who still belonged to themselves and who had already crossed over? Antarctica was the only direction left. The awoken splintered, but those still aligned followed the convergence. Map, Ravi, and I traveled separately, crossing borders in silence, each carrying fragments of the truth. The journey wasn't official. There were no permits or research papers, just coordinates, latitude, longitude, and an altitude drop no satellite could scan. A supply pilot took us as far as McMurdo, no questions asked. From there, we moved by snowcat, guided only by the map encoded in our dreams. The sky was endless, white, no structures, no markers, just ice, silence, and the signal buried below. After 40 hours, the dream patterns shifted. The room returned, but with new detail markings on the walls, like blueprints layered in motion. At the center, a voice repeated the phrase, "Final alignment within reach." When we arrived at the marked location, we found no building, no hatch. Just a depression in the ice, smooth and circular. Beneath it, the snow vibrated. A faint hum, steady and low, pulsed through the soles of our boots. We set up ground-penetrating radar. The results came back impossible. A structure, nearly a kilometer wide, sat embedded below the glacier. It wasn't natural. It formed perfect radial symmetry, its core ringed by 8 extensions. The ice above it measured older than known civilization. But the structure itself emitted warmth, precise, regulated, artificial. Lena stood at the center of the depression. Her scar began to pulse. We watched in disbelief as the snow beneath her feet softened and gave way. A circular aperture emerged, lined with obsidian-like material, smooth and reflective. The construct had no visible seams, only the same symbols from our dreams etched in a repeating band around the edge. She stepped forward without hesitation. The scar lit in response dim, then bright, then steady. A vibration ran through the air, low and harmonic. The door slid open without sound. Inside, a ramp descended into the ice, surrounded by a dim blue glow that seemed to exist without source. We entered together. As we descended, a message repeated inside our minds. It wasn't language. It was a feeling recognition, welcome and warning. Then finally, words. When the twin minds align, the gate will open. Ravi didn't speak, but I saw his eyes. They were changing. The descent was silent. The ramp led us into a vast chamber, domed and flawless. The walls shimmered faintly, alive with shifting patterns that mirrored the dream symbols exactly. At the center stood a platform, circular, raised and pulsing with a low blue light. As Ravi and I approached, the platform responded. It extended tendrils of light toward us, scanning, matching. When we stepped on, a wave of warmth moved through our bodies. Our scars burned once, then cooled. The voice returned, no longer distant. You are the first to complete the link. The gate is now open. Screens formed from the air itself, layers of light and memory, displaying what we thought were dreams. But they weren't dreams. They were recordings, abductions, observations, cross-sections of our lives, emotions, fears, patterns. We saw others, hundreds, maybe thousands, undergoing the same process, most fading into silence. Only a few remained active. Us, Project. Null Wake arrived too late. Their agents breached the chamber perimeter, weapons drawn. But within moments, they collapsed, overwhelmed by the frequency pulsing through the structure. The light didn't harm them. It overwhelmed their neural stability, exposing every repressed thought, every fragment of buried memory. They dropped, not dead, but undone. The construct spoke again. This is not invasion. This is inheritance. The experiment was survival years and hours. The light deepened. Ravi's body shivered, then straightened. His eyes, once dark now, reflected the chamber's glow. "We've always been here," he whispered. "We just didn't know how to connect." I reached for him, and he took my hand. The moment we touched, it all changed. The chamber opened, not into space, but into understanding. The portal was not physical. It was consciousness, shared, vast, collective. Knowledge flooded through us. We saw the architecture of the network. Earth wasn't a test site. It was a seedbed. Human minds were vessels capable of growth, of reach. The abductions weren't experiments. They were calibrations. We were offered a choice: sever the signal and preserve the illusion of amplify it, awakening others across the dream-layered world. We chose the second. Slowly, steadily, the network pulsed outward, and across Earth, millions began to dream the same dream. The white room, the symbols, the voice. Not everyone will understand, but none of us will ever sleep the same again. The first time I saw them, I thought it was just a trick of the flash, till I noticed they were always facing the lens, even when it should have been impossible. My name's Elise Mora. I've spent most of my adult life tracking wildlife, through dense forests with nothing but a pack, a tripod, and a quiet respect for things that keep to the dark. I came out here to the Pine Barrens for the owl's-barred, great-horned, the occasional long-eared, hoping to capture nocturnal hunting patterns for a new field series. What I found instead was something else, something that looked like owls, moved like owls but felt wrong in a way I still can't explain. At first, it was just a curiosity. The motion triggers on my trail cameras were firing more than usual, mostly around 2 or 3 in the morning. When I reviewed the footage, it was always the same: a single owl perched dead center in the frame, staring straight into the lens. Then to owls, then 4. The pattern kept repeating, always framed perfectly, always motionless except for their eyes. Most animals ignore the IR flash, or at least flinch from it. These birds didn't move, they just watched. I dismissed it. At first maybe I'd placed the cameras too close to a nest, but the locations changed. The owls didn't. Different clearings, different gear setups, same exact composition. Even the trees started to look familiar. On the third night, 2 of my 5 trail cams went dark. No wind damage, no animal interference. When I pulled the SD cards, they were completely blank. Not corrupted, just empty, like they'd never recorded anything at all. I tried to laugh it off, told myself it was the damp. Maybe I was just sleep deprived. But then I noticed the mistomps. The photos were all taken around 2:43 a.m., time I usually slept straight through. Except last night, I'd woken up suddenly. to a sound I couldn't place, not an animal call, more like a low-frequency pulse that made the window shiver. I didn't think much of it until I saw one photo in particular. 5 owls, evenly spaced in a semicircle. Their eyes didn't reflect red like they should under infrared. They glowed white, like backlit glass. When I returned to one of the sites to double-check the camera rig, I noticed impressions in the pine needles, not animal tracks. No claws, no pads, just 5 perfectly round marks in the ground, as if something had stood there, heavy and deliberate, watching the camera and me. I looked up, and there they were again, not moving, just watching. I didn't post the owl photos right away. It felt personal, like I'd captured something I wasn't meant to see, but curiosity won out. I uploaded a few to a wildlife subreddit, asking if anyone had seen similar behavior. Within hours, my inbox flooded. Most comments were harmless speculation. Bird facts, odd humor, but a handful stood out. People said they'd seen the same thing. Some mentioned dreams they couldn't explain. Others talked about waking up in strange places or losing time. One message in particular stayed with me. It was from a user named isopennow. No greeting, no signature, just 6 words. "They're not owls. Stop filming them." I tried to trace the account, but it was empty. No posts, no history, a dead end. That same night, I heard the sound again, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. I stepped outside with a flashlight. The trees stood motionless. No wind, no wildlife. My breath felt heavier than it should have. I checked the time, 2:43 a.m. I don't remember going back inside. The next morning, I woke up on the forest floor, 20 feet from my cabin. No shoes, no jacket. My camera was slung over my shoulder, powered on. The last image taken showed a blur of white and 2 glowing shapes. I didn't remember taking it. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the rest. Most were just static or pure black, as if the lens had been covered. But one image showed my cabin taken from the tree line, though I hadn't left the property, at least not intentionally. I went back online and dug deeper. Forums I'd never noticed before. Threads about screen memories and visual decoys. Apparently owls were common in abduction reports, not real owls' fabrications. Cover images placed in the brain to hide something else. The details were shaky, but they all pointed to one idea. The eyes weren't just watching, they were masking. That night, I received another message from isopennow. Coordinates, a spot about 30 minutes north of my cabin. A single line. Followed, "You won't believe what's there, but your body already knows." I copied the coordinates and packed. I left before sunrise, hiking light with just a pack, flashlight, and backup batteries. The coordinates led to an unmarked trailhead past an old ranger station, long boarded up. I followed a narrow path, overgrown with pine saplings and thorn bush. The terrain uneven and quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. No birdsong, no insects, just the crunch of my boots and the low static hum that had started pulsing faintly in my ears. After an hour, I found the clearing. It wasn't marked on any of my maps. In the center was a perfect circle about 30 feet wide, where the ground had been scorched black. No brush, no trees, nothing alive. The soil was hardened and smooth, as if melted. At the circle's edge stood a metal pole, half buried, with no markings or wires. When I touched it, my fingers tingled like from mild electric shock, but there was no visible power source. My camera wouldn't power on, neither would my phone. I heard movement behind me, soft tires over gravel. I crouched low and watched as a black SUV passed down a nearby fire road, slowing briefly at the turnoff before continuing out of sight. No plates, windows tinted too dark to see through. I waited until the sound faded, then moved quickly back toward the trail. Halfway down, I caught the distant whine of a drone. It hovered briefly above the treetops, almost invisible against the cloud cover, before veering off toward the clearing. Back at the cabin, I tried reporting the vehicle to the local sheriff, but he barely looked up from his coffee. Said I was probably seeing Forestry Service contractors. When I pressed him, his tone changed. Told me I might be trespassing on restricted land and should let it go. A few hours later, my friend Meyerhood offered to help me analyze the metadata on the owl. Photos texted me she was heading up. She never arrived. Her last message just said, "Your cameras, something's not right. I'm coming up now." After that, silence. That night, I unplugged my router, removed the batteries from every device, and covered the windows. I couldn't prove anything yet, but it was clear. Someone or something was watching me now. I stopped sleeping through the night. Every sound outside felt deliberate, like something was waiting for me to let my guard down. I kept my camera, gear in a locked box near the bed, along with an old tape recorder that didn't rely on digital storage. My phone stayed off. Instead, I turned to forums, late-night AM broadcasts, and archived threads on encrypted networks. The deeper I looked, the more I found people like me isolated, confused, and afraid. They called themselves Some had stories almost identical to mine. Always the same signs: owls, missing time, recurring dreams, and a strange mark behind the right shoulder blade. One forum post caught my attention. A user had uploaded photos from a forest near my area. Carved into the bark of several pine trees were identical triangular symbols, 3 clean slashes forming a perfect equilateral shape. He called it the pine pattern. I searched my own archives, scanning old shots taken in the background of my wildlife work. The symbols were there, not obvious, but consistent. I zoomed in on one tree near the burned circle. The triangle was clear, almost too clean to be natural. That same photo had been erased from my cloud storage days ago, but I'd kept a hard copy without realizing it. I reached out to the poster. He responded immediately, said he'd seen the pattern for years, thought it was just graffiti until he started having dreams. In them, tall figures stood among the trees, unmoving, watching. No faces, just silhouettes and those same glowing white eyes. He'd woken up outside 3 times, barefoot and disoriented, with a high-pitched ringing in his ears. We compared notes, maps, and timestamps. There was overlap. The activity clustered in specific regions, always near pine forests, always at night, always just before rain. I went out that evening and found one of the symbols myself, half hidden behind a fallen branch. It looked fresh, like it had been cut recently, but the tree's bark showed no signs of decay. That same night, my entire archive of wildlife footage, 10 years of work, vanished from my external drive. No deletion history, just gone. Whatever this is, it's not interested in being documented. But it had already marked me, and now I knew where to look. The old trail cam near the northern ridge was one I'd forgotten about. It wasn't connected to my network and ran on a standalone battery. I had set it months ago, testing a new motion algorithm, and left it buried beneath brush and moss near an unused game trail. Somehow, it still worked. When I retrieved the SD card, my hands were shaking before I even opened the files. There were only 2 clips on it, both taken on the same night at 3:33 a.m., exactly 1 week ago. The first showed the clearing, quiet and empty under the moonlight. Then, a flicker of movement from the left. A shape stepped into frame, tall, thin, no features. Its skin looked pale or reflective, difficult to describe, like it absorbed light. Instead of casting shadow, it moved slowly toward the camera, stopping just feet away. Its eyes were unmistakable, 2 perfect white discs, glowing faintly without any source of light. Then, static, the feed cut out. The second clip was only 2 seconds long, just enough to show the shape turning its head toward the camera before the footage broke apart again into white noise. When I paused the frame at its peak resolution, I could make out something behind the figure, faint, hovering just above the tree line. A circular distortion in the air, like heat shimmer, but pulsing. I saved the image to a thumb drive, then disconnected everything from the laptop. I returned to the site at dusk and found something I hadn't noticed before. Embedded in the soil beneath the trail cam was a shard of dark material about the size of my thumb. It looked like metal but felt organic, slightly warm, soft at the edges, pulsing faintly when I touched it. I wrapped it in cloth and stored it in a lead-lined box I used for batteries. That night, the dreams began again, sharper this time. I wasn't just seeing the owls anymore, I was hearing them. Not calls or hoots, but words, my name, over and over. Their voices weren't loud, but clear, and always in unison. The mark on my back reappeared the next morning. 3 shallow lines in a triangle just beneath my right shoulder blade. It hadn't been there the day before. I didn't remember being touched, but something had been close enough to leave it. The deeper I went, the more I found others like me, people who had seen things, lost time, and carried scars they couldn't explain. I followed a lead from one of the forums to a small support group that met once a month in a rented cabin about 20 miles west of the Barrens. They called themselves the Waking, a quiet group of 6 who shared stories only with each other, never online, never recorded. When I walked in, no one was surprised to see me. They said people like us always find the way, eventually. Each person there had their own version of the same experience. All of them had seen owls. All had vanished for short periods, with no memory of where they'd been. One man, a former EMT, described waking up in the woods with blood under his fingernails, and his boots missing. A woman from town shared dreams of cold white light that pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat. A quiet man named Wallace showed us a notebook filled with hand-drawn symbols identical to the pine pattern I'd found on the trees. As we talked, a larger picture began to take shape. The events weren't random. They followed cycles. Always. In threes, 3 nights, 3 visitors, 3 marks. One of the group, a teacher named Hera, explained that she'd recorded her dreams for over a year. In them, time repeated. Places changed subtly. Events rearranged. She believed we were being tested, observed inside controlled loops. Each variation, she said, mapped our reactions. When I asked why, no one answered at first. Then Wallace said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. We're not the message, we're the response. That night, he tried to break the loop. He returned alone to one of the marked sites and never came back. We searched for him the next day. His car was still parked at the trailhead. The keys were inside. The driver's seat was warm. That same evening, I received one final message from Eyes Open Now. It simply read, "You need to leave the group. They'll be silenced next." I didn't respond. I just packed my things and drove through the night. I didn't go home after leaving the group. Instead, I drove south along back roads until I reached the edge of state land that bordered a decommissioned ranger station. It hadn't been used in years, according to locals. The building was padlocked, but one of the side windows had been broken and crudely sealed with plastic. I waited until dusk and climbed through. Inside, the air was dry and stale. Dust coated every surface, and the power was long dead. But someone had used this place recently. In the back office, I found boxes that didn't belong, new file folders, aerial photographs, and a folder marked Pine Site. The documents were stamped with federal insignias, but no agency was listed by name. The aerial photos showed familiar forest sections, many with annotations or symbols, triangles, circles, grid overlays. Some matched locations I had already visited. Others I'd only seen in my dreams. One document, dated over 15 years ago, detailed a series of planned installations, low-profile surveillance nodes disguised as wildlife tagging stations. It described an operation to monitor unstructured civilian interactions with anomalous life forms. It also mentioned phase shift, conditioning, and ocular interface agents. The words meant little at first, but I kept reading. A separate memo outlined something called Project Pine Sighter, joint surveillance effort focused on a known incursion corridor through northeastern forest zones. The term ocular agents appeared repeatedly, described as non-human entities projected or embedded into the environment. In some cases, they were referred to as synthetic fauna. The document proposed that owls had been modified or entirely fabricated as passive observation tools. It explained their persistent presence, their unnatural stillness, and their focus on human eye contact. We were not being visited, we were being studied, watched in our most vulnerable moments. Near the bottom of the file, my name appeared. It was listed in a case summary as an active subject of interest. Field exposure elevated. No explanation followed, just coordinates. The same ones from Eyes Open Now. I marked them on my map. Outside, the wind picked up, and a power line near the building let out a low hum. I stayed still, listening. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called once clear, sharp, and much too close. The deeper I went, the harder it became to trust what I saw. My memory slipped in strange ways. I'd start a task, loading a battery, packing errantly to find it already done. I'd replay audio logs and hear myself say things I didn't remember recording. The nights felt longer. Sometimes I'd lie down for a moment and wake hours later, fully dressed, with mud on my boots. At first, I blamed stress. Then I started filming myself during sleep. The footage was worse than I expected. On the third night, the camera showed me rising at 3:17 a.m. I stood by the window, unmoving for nearly 12 minutes. My face was angled toward the trees, eyes wide open, no expression. Then I turned and looked directly into the camera. My eyes didn't reflect. They glowed faintly, just like the owls. I said nothing. I didn't blink. Then I lay back down, perfectly still. When I woke the next morning, I had no memory of any of it. I reviewed the other recordings. Each night, the same pattern repeated. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always the same movements. In one video, I left the cabin and returned an hour later, carrying something in my hands. The object didn't appear on the footage, just a blur, almost like a lens flare that pulsed with each step. The next morning, I found dirt and pine needles in my bed. It wasn't just sleepwalking. It felt like something inside me was being used, borrowed. My thoughts no longer felt entirely my own. Ideas would come that I couldn't trace back. Words, symbols, entire fragments of speech I'd never studied. I found notes in my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing them. They always mentioned the same thing, a convergence, and a phrase repeated again and again. Signal accepted, pattern stable. I knew the final coordinates were close. I'd passed through that part of the forest before, but never stayed long. Something about it made my skin feel wrong, like static on bare skin. This time, I wouldn't be bringing a camera. I needed to see it without interference. Whatever was out there, I was ready to meet it. I left just before dusk, carrying only a flashlight, a compass, and the folded map with the final coordinates. The route took me through parts of the forest I hadn't walked in years. The trees grew thicker here, their branches bent inward like ribs forming a hollow chest. By the time I reached the clearing, the sky had dimmed to a deep grey, and the air had gone completely still. The silence felt weighted, as if the entire forest had been paused. At the center of the clearing stood nothing, no object, no structure, just an open space marked by a perfect ring of flattened grass. But the moment I stepped inside it, everything changed. The air shimmered, the light grew sharper. I looked up and saw what I hadn't noticed before. Above me, just beneath the canopy, hung a shape not fully visible but present. A distortion as I moved. It moved, cloaked in layers of bending light. It wasn't flying. It was simply there, resting between dimensions like a ripple suspended in glass. Then the sound began. Not a hum or a voice, but a pressure, something that bypassed hearing and pressed directly into thought. It didn't speak words, but meaning formed all the same. It wasn't here to harm. It wasn't even here to explain. It was observing, and had always been. The owls, the symbols, the memory gaps, they were not symptoms, but interfaces. It showed me a vision, not literal, but understood. Earth, seen from above, threaded with lines of light. Not territory, not power, connection. The message was simple. We are the messengers, not the masters. You are always part of the transmission. I felt a shift in my chest, as if something that didn't belong had finally aligned. No fear, number, confusion, just clarity. My flashlight blinked once, then failed. In the final moment before everything faded to white, I looked down at my hands. The marks on my skin had changed. The triangle had closed. I don't remember leaving. I woke on my cabin floor, cold but unharmed. My cameras were wiped. My phone wouldn't power on. But on the desk was a single printed photo of my face, looking straight at the lens. And my eyes were glowing. They said the 1985 event was a power surge. But my code got a response 38. Years later, I grew up in Camera, Wyoming, where strange lights are blamed on faulty transformers or weather balloons. My mother ran the library. My father sold used trucks and drank quietly. No one in town really talked about the night the sky split open in '85. A few people did back then, but not for long. Reports were filed, but they never made it past county records. If you dig deep, like I did, you'll find a paragraph or two. Unusual atmospheric interference. Brief electrical disruption, no injuries, that's all. But my senses said different. My name's Riley Vaughan. I'm 17, and I build things, radio, sniffers, interceptors. Old school antennas, lashed together with copper wire and salvaged. Parts from estate sales. I don't believe in aliens. I believe in data, and data told me something was repeating. Small shifts in the local electromagnetic field. Pulses, always in the same place, just outside town near the ridgeline. The same place from that night in 85. At first I thought it was solar interference, so I built a directional array and filtered the noise. That's when I saw the pattern non-random, evenly spaced, like it was waiting for something. I wrote code to push test pulses through the array, just for fun. But when I ran, something responded. It zigzagged across my scope like it was tracing my output in reverse. I thought it was feedback at first, or a prank, but there was no transmission. Source, no bounce, no lag. Whatever it wasn't just receiving. It was ... listening. That night, the power flickered for 3 blocks in town. My neighbors' clocks reset. The temperature outside dropped 3 degrees in less than a minute, and I watched the signal arc upward, vanish from my display, and come back twice as strong. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, but in that moment I knew something I wasn't supposed to, and I wasn't sure if I'd discovered it or triggered it. I spent the next 3 nights watching the signal, barely sleeping. It wasn't constant more like tides. It came in pulses, sometimes faint, other times sharp enough to trip my surge. Protector, I logged each appearance, time-stamped every modulation. The pattern wasn't just repeating, it was echoing something older. I remembered an old local blackout report I found once at the library. Back then, it seemed like a boring glitch. Now, with each M-spike, I saw dates aligning down to the hour. March 18th, 1985, September 7th, 1996, February 11, 2004, all during heavy M activity. I pulled old weather logs, cross-referenced solar storms. One thing stayed consistent, the location and the sequence. It always began with a low-frequency drift, then rose fast, plateaued, then dropped suddenly, like someone drawing a mountain range by hand, always the same shape. What changed everything was the forum post, buried on a defunct message board. From 2004, posted by someone under the name MK_Fireline. They mentioned the zigzag ghost, said it looked like lightning but moved sideways, snapping from point to point like it was mapping something invisible. They mentioned Chemera by name. The post had no replies, no profile picture, but it included one attachment, a crude flight path sketched in red pixels over a map. It matched my data exactly, down to the last turn. That's when I tested the code again, this time with a clean pulse at 5-second intervals. I added a checksum just to rule out random interference. 30 seconds later, the object appeared again, same arc, same angle, same flicker across the edge of my spectrum scanner. But this time it paused, just for a second, right above the ridge, and then it vanished straight upward. That pause did something to me. I don't know how to explain it, except to say it didn't feel natural, not mechanical either. It felt aware. I sat back from my monitor and felt cold, not from fear, but something more ancient-like. I had knocked on the wrong door, and it had been waiting for years to answer. This wasn't a discovery anymore. It was a conversation, one I had just restarted. The morning after the pause, my school-issued laptop was dead. Not just slow wiped clean. BIOS locked. No boot. I hadn't even connected it to my gear. I checked my backups. Gone. Even the encrypted ones on the external drive were blank. I still had the raw data stored offline on my homemade rig, but something had clearly noticed me. That afternoon, a man showed up at my school. He wore a grey jacket with a patch I didn't recognize and said he was with a regional safety commission. He asked to speak with me privately, said there had been reports of unusual radio interference near my house. He never said my name, never mentioned the signals, but I watched his eyes. He already knew. I kept my answers short, mostly shrugged. He smiled too much and never blinked. When I asked what department he worked for, he said he was a contractor for infrastructure anomalies. That didn't exist. I checked. He left a card with no name, no phone, just a barcode. I scanned it later. It linked to a blank white page that redirected every time I refreshed. That night, 2 drones hovered over our backyard. Silent, small, just lights against the dark. My dad noticed, but thought it was kids messing around. I knew better. The next day I posted a thread on a niche antenna forum. I kept it vague. Just basic M anomalies, signal patterns, nothing personal. Within an hour, I got a private message from someone calling themselves Echo Rider. No greeting, no details, just one sentence. If they're already watching, you need to read about Aurorex. I followed the link he sent. It was a dead site, but I cached it. The archives held references to a buried project from the early 2000s, supposedly tied to 2 non-random atmospheric responses and signal-linked behavioral anomalies. It sounded insane till I noticed a scanned log entry. Coordinates: near Chimera, logged March 18, 1985. They weren't trying to stop the signal, they were trying to contain it. That night I disconnected everything from the internet. Whatever this was, it had eyes in places I didn't understand. And it wasn't done with me yet. Echo Rider wasn't just another online conspiracy voice. He knew things, specific things, like the exact modulation rate I had used in my test signal, and the time I sent it. That information wasn't public. We moved the conversation to a private encrypted channel he hosted himself. No usernames, no timestamps. He told me his real name was probably still on a no-fly list. He'd been kicked off military networks in the early 2000s for tracing signal. Bleed through NORAD's upper-level radar systems. Said what I was seeing was a repeat part of an old pattern that never truly ended. I didn't trust him, not completely, but I needed answers. We went line by line through the signal logs. He pointed out something I hadn't noticed: subharmonic skips at perfect Fibonacci intervals. He said that was a known feature in responsive vector behavior, a term pulled from declassified Air Force research on anomalous signal events in 1985. The files he shared weren't just theories. They were scans of real reports names, redacted, but locations and timestamps intact. One stood out. A document labeled Event KM35. It showed an incident logged during a major solar flare, with recorded electromagnetic bursts from a fixed point near same ridge, same signal profile. Echo Rider explained that responsive vectors weren't transmissions. They were behavioral patterns, technology reacting to inputs with feedback loops, but not passive, interactive. The object wasn't scanning. It was answering. I asked what it meant. He said it meant we'd triggered a process that was never meant to restart. That night, I checked my rig again. I hadn't sent any code, no pings, nothing active. but the signal returned anyway stronger. It hovered for 3 minutes, dead still, just outside the sensor radius. It didn't move, didn't blink out like before, just stayed, watching. I recorded everything, but didn't upload it. I didn't need more eyes on me. Echo Rider warned me to limit contact. He said the last person who mapped one of these signals vanished from every record IRS, DMV, even birth certificate. If it's responding to you, he wrote, then they've already decided you're a variable. That word stuck with me. Variable, not threat, not ally, just something unpredictable, something they couldn't control. I stopped using broadband. Everything went through analog lines and hardwired relays. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. I even tore down the router and packed it in foil. It didn't matter. The signal still came. So I changed my approach. Instead of streaming pulses like before, I wrote a new script, short bursts of binary modulations, spaced with deliberate gaps. On the third transmission, the object responded with identical pulses, not mirrored matched. Each pattern I sent came back with its own version, slightly altered, like a reply. I kept it simple, alternating patterns, paired intervals. Once, I tried a prime sequence, and the return added the next number. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't coincidence, or reflection. It understood. Maybe not words, not meaning in the human sense, but intention. It responded with logic. That's what made it real. I didn't tell Echo Rider everything, just that I'd confirmed vector reactivity. He went quiet for a day. When he came back, his tone had changed. He told me about someone he once knew. Braden. Mark's a signal technician in Nevada who'd discovered a similar pattern in 1997. His logs were lost, his backups erased, and then Braden vanished. No obituary, no records, just a notice to next of kin, presumed dead. That same night, I saw it again, low in the sky, almost motionless. A shimmering shape against the clouds, like heat distortion but sharper. It hovered above my house for 9 seconds, then shot straight up, vanishing without a sound. When I stepped outside, the air felt wrong to still. No insects, no wind, just silence. I ran back in. The front door lock had been tampered with. Inside, nothing was missing, but the drawers in my room were slightly open. My backup drives were untouched, but one was spinning, active, even though the power was off. I didn't speak. I didn't call anyone. I unplugged everything and watched. From the dark, I had reached a new phase. The signal wasn't just responding anymore. It was close. It knew where I lived. And now, someone else knew what I knew. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 6. Ghost Frequencies. The next transmission didn't just echo, it disrupted. I sent a short pulse sequence at dusk, expecting a quiet return. Instead, the temperature dropped 6 degrees in under a minute. Static filled the FM band across all frequencies. The lights in our house dimmed, then surged. My dad shouted from the living room, blaming a bad circuit, but I knew better. My signal had done something, or triggered something already waiting. Later that night, I started seeing flickers in my peripheral vision, brief distortions, like light bending unnaturally along the walls. At first, I thought it was stress. Then came the hum, low, constant, just beneath hearing, like pressure on my skull. I couldn't trace its source. My gear didn't register it, but I could feel it, like it was inside my head. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., a voice message landed on the hard line. No caller ID, just a scrambled recording. I ran it through noise filters. Hidden in the distortion was a name, Dr. Lane. The rest was fragments, not a craft trigger mechanism. Code unlocks behavior. The voice warned that what I'd contacted wasn't designed for communication. It was designed to listen and act. I tracked the name, Dr. Emerson Lane, former Air Force contractor specializing in atmospheric telemetry, publicly retired in 2006, privately removed after an incident during a Gulf Warrior test involving M-field anomalies. The files I found weren't official. They were message board rumors, scanned journal entries, and one faded interview transcript from a shortwave ham radio podcast. Lane had seen the same object over the Arabian desert. Same light, same pattern. Then silence. I reached out through the forum Echo Rider had used. A new user replied within the hour, quoting a line from the Lane message. It was him. He warned me not to send another signal. Said the object was only dormant until triggered, and I had already passed the threshold. The next morning, Echo Rider didn't log in. His server was offline. His entire message history erased. I checked the backup. Empty. It was like he'd never existed. Whatever this thing was, it had a threshold. And I had crossed it. Dr. Lane sent coordinates remote, near the old quarry, east of town. I biked there before sunrise, with a handheld spectrum analyzer and my sensor rig tucked in a backpack. The wind was still. No birds, no movement. I set up facing the ridge and ran a passive scan. Nothing at first. Then, just after 5:12 a.m., a pulsar clear, focused burst, centered exactly on the same frequency I'd used in my last transmission. It was faint, almost buried in noise, but unmistakable. The signal wasn't just back, it was waiting. Lane's message said to look at the geomagnetic activity from 1985. I pulled the NOAA data that afternoon. There had been a severe solar storm on March 18th, unusual, even by historical standards, that matched the first recorded event. Every subsequent appearance of the object aligned with similar solar conditions. Not exact, but close enough to suggest a trigger, something environmental, not random. Digging deeper, I found an old name in the local archives, Gerald Minter. He'd been a fire lookout in the mid-80s, still alive, still in Kemmerer, living in a retirement trailer by the river. I visited unannounced, unsure what to expect. He was quiet at first. Then I showed him the flight path from MK_firelines, post the zigzag across the ridge. His hand started shaking. He went inside and came back with a worn notebook. Inside was a sketch, drawn in pencil. The same pattern, not similar, identical. I never showed anyone, he said. They told me it was heat stroke. Said I imagined it, but it left this sound. Like a ringing, never went away. I asked him to describe the ringing. He hummed a soft tone. My skin went cold. It matched the low-frequency hum I'd been hearing in my own home for the past week. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he said something I still can't explain. You woke it up, didn't you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew that night the signal didn't return. But something else digitized faintly on my sensor readout, a repeating pattern I hadn't seen before. It was older than binary, older than language, and it wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be followed. I didn't know Max was reporting on me until it was too late. We'd been friends since grade school. He was the only person I ever trusted with the full version of what I'd seen, how the signal responded, how it echoed back like it understood. I showed him the recordings, the sketches, even Gerald Minter's notebook. He listened, asked good questions, and told me I wasn't crazy. I believed him. I should have known better. The night I decoded the pattern from the ridge, I noticed something strange. My signal jamming module, just a defensive failsafe I'd built to block low-frequency scans, had tripped without being activated. The log showed 2 spikes at exactly the time Max had come over to check in. That same night, 2 black SUVs parked at the end of my street for 20 minutes, then left without anyone getting out. I confronted him the next day. He didn't deny it. Said he was keeping me safe. That if I didn't share what I found, someone would take it anyway, and I might not survive it. He looked tired, scared even, like he was in over his head. But when I asked who he worked for, he didn't answer. He just said, "You're not supposed to be the one talking to it." That night, I packed what I could and left. My code jammer worked barely. When they came for me, it knocked out their comms long enough for me to slip out the back and disappear into the hills. As I climbed, the object appeared again. Low, still, no lights. But its presence disrupted everything. Streetlights blinked. Out in a wave, radios hissed with static, and the signal in my headset turned to a low pulse that shook the ground. It wasn't attacking. It was protecting. When I looked back, the road was dark, and the SUVs were stopped cold. Engines dead. I don't know what it saw in me, or why it helped. But I understood one thing clearly. I couldn't go back. Not to school, not to town, not to anyone. I had triggered something bigger than I could control. And now I was off-grid, alone, and being hunted. I reached the overlook just after midnight. From there, I could see the whole valley, dark and still. I set up my final transmission array, the one I'd spent weeks coding and testing. This wasn't a signal anymore. It was a full pattern synthesis, built from every response. Every variation, every anomaly I'd recorded since the beginning. It wasn't a message. It was a mirror-end exact reflection of everything the object had shown me. I didn't know what it would do. I only knew I had to send it at 1:04 a.m. I powered on the array. The air felt charged, heavy like before a thunderstorm. I hesitated, then pushed the sequence live. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the sky opened. Not with light, not exactly, but with motion. A streak of brilliance arced silently, from horizon to zenith, splitting the stars in half. The valley below went dark phones, streetlights, even car alarms died in an instant. Every satellite feed I was monitoring flatlined. Total blackout across the continent. Just for a moment, and then I saw it. Hovering low in orbit, barely visible except where it blocked the stars, was a structure massive, angular, not like a ship, but more like scaffolding. It held its shape for only seconds before folding back into darkness. The signal in my headset pulsed once, then cut out. I dumped the entire dataset to a quantum-encrypted broadcast node I'd hidden weeks earlier. Every major research server, university lab, and independent network got a copy. The file wasn't labeled or explained, just raw numbers, patterns, timestamps, and the sequence I'd used. I wanted it all out, no secrets, no gatekeeping. The last thing the signal gave me was a set of coordinates, deep in the Pacific, just numbers. I wrote them down, though I don't know why. I didn't understand what they meant, only that they weren't for me. By sunrise, I was gone. No trace, no digital trail. I deleted the last backup myself. Whatever this was, it hadn't ended. It had only revealed the edge of something deeper, something old, something watching. A year passed. I wasn't there to see it, but I've heard. What happened? Strange lights were spotted over the South Pacific, far from any shipping lanes or flight paths. Witnesses described a shimmer in the sky, like glass bending, followed by a low hum that rippled through the water. Then, silence. No debris, no signals, just empty ocean. Not long after, a new wave of online communities appeared. Anonymous coders, radio techs, even amateur astronomers all, claiming to find anomalies matching my sequence. They didn't call it alien, they called it the modulation. An open source toolkit spread quietly across the web. Light-based. Pulse, arrays, decentralized sensor grids, waveform generators, all modeled after the data I released. They weren't just studying the signal anymore. They were interacting with it. Governments said nothing. Major satellite networks still haven't acknowledged the blackout. Agencies that used to chase down every unexplained transmission now stay silent. It's not denial, it's avoidance. Like they know what it is, but have no way to stop it. Some of the early users, those who followed the signal too closely, started reporting the same symptoms I had, ringing in the ears. Sudden, vivid dreams, patterns that appeared behind closed eyes. Some say it's hallucination. Others believe it's memory. One of them found a recording buried in a forgotten subnet. Audio only, low quality, no metadata. It was my voice, a short message. It listens, but it remembers. I don't recall recording it, but I know it's real. I haven't returned. There's no point. This wasn't a contact event. It was an awakening. A signal buried in the earth, waiting for the right conditions to surface again. I was never chosen. I was just the right frequency at the wrong time, now. The world listens quietly, not with fear, but with something older, recognition. As if some part of us always knew this signal wasn't foreign. It was familiar, ancient, and still active. The signal is out. The response has begun. The silence beneath isn't absence. It's attention, waiting, watching, preparing. The last rays of the sun felt too heavy that day, as if they carried a secret meant only for me. And in that golden light, I saw it again, silent, distant, impossible. My name is Leela Vaughn. I'm 32, a documentary filmmaker though. Lately, that feels more like a cover than a profession. I've built a career around nostalgiate, millimeters reels, old ski lodges, stories people thought they'd forgotten. But this trip isn't about any of that. I came back to Timber Peak Resort for one reason: to confront a memory that's haunted me since I was 7. It happened right here on this mountain, on a clear winter afternoon just like this one. Remember standing alone on the ridge, my breath sharp in the cold, watching the sky melt into gold. And then I saw it, a disc, smooth and motionless, hovering above the slope. No sound, no movement, just watching. My friends sped past on their boards, oblivious. My parents waved from below, but I couldn't look away, and I never truly have. No one else saw it. No photo, no proof. For years I tried to convince myself it was nothing light on the snow, a dream, a child's confusion. But the memory stayed. It grew quietly, like a pulse beneath everything else I did. Now I'm back, cameras in hand, under the pretense of filming a documentary about winter sports nostalgia. In truth, I'm here to find whatever it was I saw that day, to prove it was real, or to finally let it go. I stepped off the lift an hour ago and felt the same sharp silence I remembered from that day. The mountain hasn't changed much. The wind still carries that dry, hollow hum. I hiked up to the ridge, set the tripod, and leveled my viewfinder toward the western slope. The sun would touch the trees soon. I hit record, then I waited. As the first tendrils of golden light crept over the ridge, I watched my digital monitors flicker and die, one by one, until only the analog cameras hummed with silent purpose. I crouched in the snow to check the power cables. Nothing was loosened, yet every battery I'd brought failed at the same moment the sun touched the horizon. I packed a small notebook and trudged toward the lodge, where I'd arranged to meet someone who might understand strange failures at golden hour. In the common room, a man in his 50s stared out a frost-covered window. He introduced himself as Matt, a lifelong skier who'd worked here as an instructor 20 years ago. He spoke in low tones, as though afraid the walls would listen. "I saw something," he said, tracing the condensation with a finger. Not a plane, not a helicopter. It glowed like molten metal and hovered without sound. His description matched mine so precisely that my chest tightened. He admitted he never told anyone, worried they'd think him insane. He sketched the shape on a napkin, a perfect disc, edges blurred by light. I asked about cameras or witnesses. He shook his head. "Phones don't pick it up. They never have." I thanked him and returned to the ridge as the sky deepened from gold to orange. I cued the analog deck and held my breath. Through the viewfinder, I tracked the sun's descent, the air sharp and still. Then I saw it, a flash of incandescent light, too quick to register fully, yet unmistakable against the dusky sky. I slammed the deck stop, rewound the tape, and played it back. The image wavered, a luminous pulse in one frame before the screen cut to black. My heart raced and my vision blurred. A wave of something like static rippled through my mind, bringing a flood of childhood memories I'd locked away. The taste of cold air, the sudden hush, the gleam of that disc staring back at me. I stumbled back to my pack, trembling with both fear and exhilaration. The ridge felt charged, as though it had been waiting for me to return. I realized then that the phantom wasn't just a trick of memory, was calling me forward, deeper into its silent orbit. Back at the lodge, I locked myself in my room and loaded the analog tape onto a portable player. The flash of light replayed once more, a single frame of pure luminosity before blankness. I grabbed my laptop to search for anything resembling ether, but every mention vanished as soon as it appeared. I typed Project Ether Mountain Surveillance and watched search results reload to no matches found. My chest tightened. The agency's name felt burned into my mind, yet the internet treated it like a ghost. Frustrated, I emailed the tape to a trusted colleague for analysis and fell into a restless sleep. At dawn, I discovered the email undelivered, and the reply from an unknown address. Stop or regret it. No signature, only capital letters, screaming warning. My blood ran cold. I checked the doorframe for signs of forced entry and found a small scratch on the wood, as if someone pried the lock. My footage was untouched, but the file I sent was gone. Panic rose, yet my curiosity burned hotter. I packed my bag and left without breakfast. In the hallway, I spotted footprints in the thin carpet, leading toward the service stairs. I followed them to a utility closet and heard a faint click behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart pounded against my ribs as I realized I was being watched, not just by the phantom, but by something darker. I returned to the ridge with my remaining analog deck hidden in my jacket. As the sun dipped low, I set up the camera and whispered into the wind that I would not be silenced. The golden hour arrived, and once again every digital sensor died. My analog deck whirred to life and captured a shape emerging from the amber haze. It hovered for longer this time, edges shimmering like liquid metal. I felt a pull in my mind, a tug at my thoughts, as though the disc fed on my attention. I pressed record, every nerve alive with fear and fascination. The entity held my gaze until the last light slipped below the horizon. In that moment, I understood the risk I'd taken. Observing it gave it power. I tucked the tape into my jacket and trudged back to the lodge, my resolve welded by warning and wonder. I spent the morning in the lodge's tiny library, surrounded by old newspapers and yellowing folders I'd smuggled in from the archives. I flipped through declassified memos, stamped ether, and underlined passages about neurophotic phenomena, a term that sounded grandiose until I read the description: light-based intelligences that only appear when observed under precise conditions. The golden hour created a thin veil between dimensions, and human attention acted like a spotlight. My fingers trembled as I traced a list of sightings dating back decades: ski lodges in the Alps, desert plateaus in Nevada, remote islands in the Pacific. Each entry described a silent, circular shape, a flash of brilliance, and witnesses left with memory gaps or sudden panic. I copied every line. Late that afternoon, I met Jonah, a former ether communications officer who now lived off the grid in a cabin at the mountain's base. He answered my knock with cautious eyes and a shotgun propped against the doorframe. Inside, he poured strong coffee and agreed to speak only if I recorded nothing but voice. He described Black Ops surveillance teams stationed along ridges, binoculars, rigged to analog recorders, radios that cut out exactly at golden hour. He warned me they called it the feed. The more people watched, the stronger the phantom became. As he spoke, my recorder clicked and went silent. Jonah slammed his hand on the table and swore the device had been off before I walked in. I nodded, heart pounding. He offered to show me his personal notes, but asked for strict secrecy. We arranged to meet again at dusk. That night, I dreamed of the disc. It hovered inches from my face, its edges rippling like heat haze. When I woke, my head throbbed, and I found a scrap of paper under my pillow with a time and no signature. At dawn, I discovered Jonah's cabin was empty. The door was ajar and his shotgun was gone. His notebook lay on the floor, pages torn out. I read the final words he'd scrawled. "If you go on, you go alone." My breath caught. The walls felt close, as though they had ears. I packed my files and left the cabin behind, each step echoing my fear and determination. The phantom had allies I couldn't see. Now I had to find them before they found me. Late one evening, I slipped into the resort's small media center and found an untouched archive of 1970s newsreels stored in dusty canisters. I loaded a NATO training film from 1972 onto the projector, heart hammering as the grainy footage flickered to life. There it was, above the denuded tree line of a military base, a flat disc suspended silently in the orange glow of dusk. Soldiers trained below, oblivious to its presence. I recorded the segment with my analog camcorder, then fast-forwarded to a declassified report tucked behind the film spools. Its title read Project Etherfield Observations, 1972, and a single line jumped out at me. Observation breeds growth. My breath caught as I realized that the disc was not a static object, but a living intelligence that fed on human focus. I scanned the report further, the being adapted to each witness's emotional state, amplifying fear or awe to strengthen its coherence. Past encounters had left observers with sudden anxiety, vivid hallucinations, and in extreme cases, psychotic breaks. The golden hour provided the precise light conditions for its emergence, acting like a thin membrane between our world and its dimension. Every note I took felt like a confession. I cross-referenced dates and found similar entries in field logs from alpine ski patrols and desert research teams. The patterns matched. Silent appearance, a pulse of light, then fragments of memory lost forever. I felt a tremor of dread as I realized my own footage had likely contributed to the disk's evolution. I packed the documents and film into my pack and left the center, pausing on the stairwell to steady my racing mind. In the cold air outside, I cradled the film canister and stared westward, the sun a dull glow behind the peaks. My chest tightened with both triumph and horror. I had proof of its existence and insight into its nature, but now I understood the price. Every recording, every witness interview, every curious glance made it stronger. I slipped back into the dark corridors of the lodge, the weight of knowledge pressing on me like a living thing. The phantom was growing, and I was its unwitting catalyst. I resolved then that I had to find a way to contain it before it consumed. Every mind turned toward it. I arranged a private screening of my rough cut in the lodge's small theater, inviting only 3 trusted colleagues and a retired ski patrolman who had once witnessed the disc. We sat in dim light as the film rolled. Footage of the 1972 NATO disc, analog flashes from my tapes, interviews with Jonah and Matt. At first, viewers watched in silence, faces pale but composed. Then, halfway through, the patrolman gasped and pressed his hands to his temples. My editor clutched his chair arm, eyes unfocused. The retired instructor shivered and whispered, "It's here." I paused the projector, heart pounding, as a low hum filled the room. The glow from the screen dimmed and flickered, though the projector lens remained lit. I backed toward the exit, my colleagues rising in panic. The air felt thick, as if charged by unseen currents. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights warped, elongating shadows and then snapping back into place. My editor's face twisted with pain, and he fled, muttering nonsense. The patrolman collapsed against the wall, nose bleeding. I knelt to help him, but he pushed me away, eyes wild, murmuring about pulses of light in the corners of the room. Outside, the sun had not yet reached golden hour, but through the frosted window I saw a disc-shaped silhouette slide over the roof ridge. It hovered against the pale sky, edges glowing faintly. My breath caught in tremors shook my hands. I stumbled back into the theater to find my recorder spinning in mid-air, tapes unraveling like ribbons. My head throbbed and I staggered out of the building. In the parking lot, time felt unmoored. Cars idled with engines stuttering, clocks on dashboards spinning backward, then forward. I gripped the hood of a Jeep to steady myself and felt blood trickle down my temple. My vision blurred and the world swayed. A sudden wave of nausea forced me to my knees in the snow. I pressed my hands to my head as a whisper echoed inside my mind, repeating my name over and over. Fear and fascination warred within me. I realized the entity was no longer confined to golden hour or to film. It fed on collective attention and now sought to consume reality itself. I forced myself to rise, every nerve alight with dread and determination. My body ached, my hands trembled, and a thin film of blood coated my glove. I slid my pack off. My back opened it and withdrew the canister of 1972 footage. Clutching it like a lifeline, I set off toward the ridge once more, resolved to confront the phantom before it shattered every perception of truth. I reached the ridge just as the sun crept toward the horizon, the film canister clutched in my gloved hand. I planned to destroy the footage, to break the cycle of attention feeding the phantom. But my phone buzzed with an alert that froze my blood. The first leak. My producer, Claire, had uploaded my analog clips to a streaming site under the title Golden Hour Phantom Exposed. Within minutes, thousands of views turned into millions. Comments speculated about secret government projects and alien invasion. Kupops, I pressed my palm to my mouth and watched a fresh comment. I saw it last night over Los Angeles. I looked down at my hands, shaken by betrayal and guilt. Claire arrived at the ridge in an SUV, her breath visible in the cold air. She smiled triumphantly and thrust her phone at me. "It's going global," she said, eyes bright with excitement. I told her it was dangerous, that every view strengthened the entity, but she laughed and refused to listen. She said this was the moment we'd been waiting for, that fame would force authorities to act. I saw the ridge's silhouette twist in the golden haze and felt the familiar tug in my mind. I grabbed Claire's arm and begged her to delete the video. She shrugged me off and climbed back into the SUV. The engine roared and she sped down the slope, leaving skid marks in the snow. I stared after her, dread pooling in my stomach. That night, news alerts reported unverified sightings across 5 continents. Footage showed a disc gliding silently over city skylines. Official statements blamed experimental drone tests or viral marketing stunts. Social media challenges invited people to face the phantom at sunset with their phones raised. Fear spread like wildfire. I heard from Matt, the old instructor, who said his neighbor collapsed after filming the sky. Jonah's cabin was torched by an unknown arsonist. My editor was committed to a psychiatric ward. The phantom had slipped its bounds and was feeding on collective fear. I realized Claire was gone on calls, no messages, no sign of her SUV. The ridge felt empty and hostile. Every shadow looked like a shape dissolving into light. I sank to my knees in the snow and pressed my forehead to the ground. I understood then that not all attention was equal. Curiosity empowered it. Fear magnified it. Now, to save what remained of reality, I had to strip the phantom of both. I stood and gathered my pack, resolve hardening into purpose. The final confrontation would demand more than memory or footage, it would require unseeing. I discovered the support group by accident in an obscure forum thread titled Golden Hour Witnesses Only. The thread was a mosaic of stories from people in Europe, Asia, and the Americas who'd seen the same disc at sunset in childhood. I messaged the moderator, Mara, and she invited me to a secure video call that night. 12 faces appeared on screen, each framed by fading daylight. We shared our memories. The same hush, the same gleam, the same emotional echo that followed. No 2 stories were identical, yet all followed the same pattern, solitary witness, no proof, no one to believe. Them. We realized our memories formed a network of attention, and that network could act as both a conduit and a barrier. Mara proposed an observation blackout at golden hour the next day. We would all face away from the sun, close our eyes, and refuse to look. She theorized that by cutting off collective attention, we could starve the phantom. We agreed on a precise time coordinated across time zones. In the hours before sunset, I prepared a live stream to guide the ritual. I gathered my tapes and notes and sat before the camera in the ridge's shadow. As golden hour arrived, the chat window filled with messages. Ready, eyes closed, holding breath. I spoke quietly, instructing everyone to visualize a blank sky, to unsee the phantom, to let their memories slip away just enough to break its feedback loop. My own eyelids felt heavy as I shut them, recalling the taste of cold air and the shape's outline until the image faded. Across the globe, I felt a ripple of resistance, as though countless minds were pulling their gaze inward. Then came the backlash. Some witnesses reported sudden headaches. Others heard whispers in their ears, urging them to look. The phantom lashed out through thought, targeting those most determined to resist. Mara's voice broke in the chat. Don't open your eyes. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, until finally golden hour passed. I opened my eyes to a sky devoid of shape, a silence deeper than snow. Messages flooded in, relief, disbelief, triumph. The network had held for the first time. I sensed the phantom wavering on the edge of perception. I exhaled, aware that the final act still lay ahead. The ritual had bought us time, but to end this, I would need to confront the phantom alone and unsee it forever. I waited on the ridge before sunrise, the 1972 canister, and my final tape recorder laid in the snow. Beside me, my live stream feed was set to go live at exactly 6:42 p.m. The precise moment golden hour began here. The support group had dispersed, their rituals successful but wary. Now the burden fell solely on me. As the sun dipped, I pressed record and spoke into the camera. I remember a child in snow, looking up at a disc that tested the boundaries of my mind. I will now narrate that memory in reverse, unweaving it from my soul. I described the scene backward first, the collapsed shape fading from sight, then the hum of fear receding, down to the moment I first felt breath stalled in my throat. My voice remained calm, even as my heart pounded, with each reversed detail. I felt the phantom's grip loosen, like ice melting at dawn. The chat window blinked with thousands of viewers following my words in real time, their collective intention echoing the support ritual but inverted, to unsee rather than to observe. Golden light spilled over the peaks, and I paused my narrative to glance at the horizon. For an instant, the discs shimmered, their edges coalescing into form. I met its silent gaze and continued. My memory unraveled names, images, feelings. Away into the cold air, the entity quivered, flickering in the amber haze as though caught in a broken loop. On screen, I saw viewers close their eyes as instructed, and I closed mine too, feeling the last threads of recollection slip away. A tremor passed through the ridge, and the disc shattered into shards of light that scattered across the sky before, vanishing entirely. I opened my eyes to empty sunset, to a world unmarked by memory, and realized I could no longer recall the taste of cold air, nor the gleam of metal in the dusk. I pressed stop, my hands trembling on the recorder, and watched the final feed end. My head felt hollow, but a surprising peace bloomed in its absence. I stood and slid the empty canister into my pack. As I turned to leave, a small figure appeared at the trailhead, a child in a bright snowsuit, eyes on the sky. I held my breath. The child looked up, lips parted, then shook their head and stepped back into the trees without a word. I exhaled, knowing the cycle had broken and that forgetting, not witnessing, was the final victory. I didn't realize I'd been placed in the experiment until the woman from House 3 started watching me sleep. Mariposa wasn't where I thought I'd end up, but after missing out on campus housing and running out of time, the cool arrangement seemed like a last resort. 3 houses, weathered, boxy things, sat in a staggered triangle just off a winding service road on the edge of university land. The area felt unfinished, like it had been cleared in a hurry and never fully planned. No fences, no signage, just a crude gravel lot and a mailbox labeled Yosemite Ridge Housing Initiative. I moved into House 1. Rent was low. The lease was through a third-party vendor loosely affiliated with the university, and I was told power came from solar and limited municipal extension. In other words, off-grid, but not quite illegal. Most of the residents were other displaced students, a couple grad students, one guy doing post-bac pre-em'd, a few undergrads like me. But House 3 was different. I didn't meet anyone from there the first week. Its blinds were always shut, porch light always on. I assumed it housed older grad students who kept to themselves until the woman appeared. She showed up one morning in the shared kitchen between houses 1 and 2. No bag, no ID badge, no greeting. She stood behind the breakfast counter with an open bag of rice, not doing anything, just ... standing. Mid-40s maybe. Pale salt-colored hair, cropped short, like someone who never left the hospital. I thought she was a visiting researcher, or maybe someone's mum. But she didn't speak, didn't blink much either. When I asked if she needed anything, she turned her head but not her body, just stared, then left without a word. The others acted like it was normal. One girl, Hannah, shrugged and said she'd always been around and that she probably helped with property management. That didn't explain her bedroom light in House 3 staying on all night. Or how I started noticing her outside my window just past midnight, unmoving, half shrouded in the pine shadows. At first, I tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was just a little off. But deep down, I knew something was wrong the first time. She stared directly into my window while I pretended to sleep. She never spoke, but somehow she made it clear my presence here wasn't an accident. I started keeping my blinds closed at night. Not out of fear, exactly, but because I didn't know what else to do. She was there again the next night, standing beneath the eaves near the hedgerow, her face lit faintly by the moon. She didn't move, didn't look away. I lay frozen for hours, watching the outline of her figure until dawn thinned it into nothing. By the third night, I began staying up with the lights off, waiting, watching her watch me. She never knocked, never tried the door, never came close enough to trigger motion lights. But she wanted me to know she was there, and she did. One evening, I mentioned her to Wes, my housemate. I tried to make it casual. Hey, the lady from House 3 was just ... outside again. You ever talk to her? He barely looked up from his laptop. She's harmless. You get used to it. Used to what? The nightly surveillance, the total silence, the complete lack of any context. I pressed him. Do you know her name? He shook his head. Nah, she doesn't really talk. Been here longer than I have. That was supposed to reassure me, I think, but it didn't. If anything, it unsettled me more. Everyone here accepted her, like she was just part of the background, a feature of the environment, not a person. But she was always looking at me, not at Hannah, not at Wes, just me. One night, around 2 a.m., I walked into the common kitchen to grab water. I didn't turn on the light, I didn't need to. The moon was full, and the window above the sink let in enough to navigate. As I turned the corner, I saw her standing motionless by the fridge. No sound, no expression, just staring. I froze mid-step. Her head turned slowly toward me, like she'd been waiting. The moment stretched. I couldn't tell if she was going to speak or scream. She did neither. She walked past me, brushing my shoulder gently as she left, bare feet silent against the floor. I didn't move until I heard her door close behind her. Something was wrong with her, but something was also wrong with this place. And now I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being watched, it was being studied. The more I asked, the more I realized no one wanted answers, they wanted silence. After the kitchen encounter, I started asking questions. In earnest, not just to housemates, but to people across the COP students I barely knew. Most gave vague answers. A few laughed it off. But one guy, Julian from House 2, got visibly tense when I brought her up. "She's fine," he said, too quickly. "Just a little weird. Probably has some university deal. Don't mess with it." I asked what kind of deal. He stared at me for a second, then said, "Look, she's always been here. You're not the first person to get spooked. Just don't overthink it. It passes." But it wasn't passing. And no one could tell me her name, her role, or even confirm she was a student. Every answer was a dismissal. Every attempt at conversation felt rehearsed. The more I asked, the more their discomfort grew. Not fear avoidance, like they'd signed something or seen something they weren't allowed to talk about. I finally asked Wes again, more directly this time. "Is she part of some university project? This feels like a study or an experiment or something." He frowned, set his laptop aside and leaned back. "Man, I don't know. People say she's related to the housing company, like a supervisor's sister or something." He paused. "Just don't go looking for trouble. People who dig too much don't stay long around here." The way he said it made me pause. I asked what he meant. He shrugged. "A guy in my room last year, obsessed with her, went down a rabbit hole. After a while, he stopped going to class, started writing notes all over the walls. Then he left. No notice, no forwarding info, just gone." I asked where he went. "No one ever said," Wes replied, and that was the end of it. That night, I found a sheet of paper taped inside one of the kitchen cabinets. It wasn't mine. Old, faded, torn on one side. It was a list, just first names, each marked with a date. All within the last 2 years. All ending with a single word, returned. My name wasn't on it. Not yet, but there was a blank space underneath the last entry. I took a photo and put the paper back exactly as I found it. Whatever this was, I had a feeling I'd just stepped into its next phase. I thought the line between normal and wrong was still intact, till I found her inside the locked maintenance shed. The door to the maintenance shed behind House 3 had always been padlocked. Rusted shut, barely touched. It sat against the rear tree line like a forgotten piece of the property. That morning, it was wide open. No sign of a forced entry, just open. I stepped closer and found drag marks in the dirt shallow grooves, like something heavy had been pulled in. I didn't go inside. I just stared at the dark threshold until the hair on my neck stood up. Later that day, I checked my room key lanyard and realized the spare was missing. I kept it in a small zip pouch with other backups: laundry, bike lock, mailbox. Only the room key was gone. I searched everything twice. It wasn't lost. It had. been taken. That night, I woke to a soft clicking sound. At first, I thought it was the vent, or maybe a fan stalling. Then I realized it was the doorknob, turning slowly, stopping, turning again. I held my breath. The knob stopped. Silence. Then, footsteps, bare feet on wood. Light, deliberate. I stayed still until morning. When I checked the hallway, nothing was there. But something had changed in me. The uncertainty was gone. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone was inside. The next day, I walked the entire property, searching for answers. That's when I saw her again. Not watching, moving. She was slipping out of a crawlspace access panel behind House 2. No tools, no gloves, just crawling out of the dirt like she belonged there. When she stood, she turned toward me. Her face was blank, calm, and without hesitation, she walked the gravel path back to House 3. No acknowledgement, no shame, like it was part of her routine. That evening, I checked every door, every window in my room, locked them all, then placed my chair against the door before sleeping. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the hallway floor creaking again. Not movement, just weight shifting, just outside my door. I stayed awake until dawn. No knocks, no voices. But I knew she was there, listening, waiting. And now, I wasn't just part of something strange, was trapped inside it. She didn't break in to steal, she came for me, and she didn't care if I was awake. It happened just after 3 a.m. The rain had started hours earlier, a slow, steady rhythm against the roof. I hadn't slept, just lay staring at the ceiling with the chair still wedged against the door. I told myself it was another quiet night, that maybe she'd moved on, but something felt off, heavier, like the air in the room wasn't mine anymore. Then I heard it, a soft thump, not outside, not in the hall, from inside the closet, slow and rhythmic, like someone gently tapping from within. I stayed frozen for a moment, too scared to move. Then I slid the chair aside and approached. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing, just the sound of my own pulse. I opened it quickly, trying to catch whatever was inside. What I saw will never leave me. She was crouched low, folded awkwardly between hanging coats and shoeboxes, her face tilted up toward mine. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. In one hand, she held one of my neckties, looped loosely around her throat. In the other, a kitchen knife, my knife. I hadn't even noticed it missing. When I stepped back in shock, she lunged. The struggle was short, but violent. She moved fast, but not with strength, more like a reflex, like she'd been programmed to complete a task. I grabbed her wrists, shoved her backward into the closet wall, and screamed for help. My voice cracked from panic. Doors opened down the hall. Wes was first in, followed by 2 others. We pulled her out together. She didn't fight, just stared blankly as she collapsed to the floor, the necktie still hanging from her hand. Campus security arrived before the police. She didn't speak, didn't resist. When they cuffed her, she didn't even look confused, just calm. Someone said she was the property manager's sister, that she'd had episodes before. They said it like it explained everything, like this was just a rare outburst from a troubled woman. But it didn't explain how she got in, or how she knew where I kept my knife, or why she hid for hours in a space that barely fit her body. This wasn't random, it was targeted, and I wasn't the first. I was just the first to fight back. They called it a mental health crisis, but no one explained the device they found in her spine. The police kept me at the station until sunrise. The questions were routine. How long had I known her? Had there been previous incidents? Did I provoke her in any way? I answered everything as calmly as I could, but it was clear they weren't listening for new information. They already had their story. She was identified as Evelyn Granger, listed as the younger sister of the property manager on file with the leasing company. According to them, she had a documented history of dissociative episodes and had been allowed to live on site for supervision. That explanation circulated fast. By noon, everyone had heard it. Even the students who claimed not to know her the day before suddenly remembered hearing something about that. It was neat, convenient, too convenient. That evening, Wes filled me in on what hadn't made the report. When they searched her room in House 3, they found hospital tags, syringes, and prescription labels with scrubbed-out patient numbers. But the biggest detail leaked from a campus EMT. During the intake exam, doctors discovered a small device embedded in the base of her spine. Not a pacemaker, not a tracking chip, something else. It had no commercial markings, and attempts to remove it caused immediate seizures. She was transferred to a federal medical facility before the hospital could run full tests. No updates since around the same time. Strange things started happening in the co-op. Wi-Fi dropped out every night. After midnight, phones refused to stay charged. Laptop screens glitched with static patterns before shutting down completely. I brought it up to maintenance, but they just shrugged. Old wiring, probably weather-related. But the outages always started at the same time. Only affected houses 1 through 3. The rest of the campus was fine. One night I turned on my audio recorder and left it running. When I checked it the next morning, it had captured a low pulse, barely audible, repeating every few seconds. A steady hum, like a beacon or a looped signal. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it hadn't been there before she came into my room. The others may have accepted the official story. I didn't. Something deeper was hiding behind the silence. Whatever she was, she hadn't been working alone, and her room was the control center. After Evelyn was removed from the property, the back door of House 3 was boarded shut. No one was allowed inside. The leasing company claimed it was under temporary inspection for habitability concerns. But I knew they weren't doing repairs. They were hiding something. A week passed. Security presence dropped. The students lost interest. I didn't. One night, after the power flickered off across the COP again, I slipped behind the property line with a flashlight and bolt cutter. The lock on the basement door was rusted but easy to break. The air inside smelled stale, like paper and bleach. It wasn't a home, it was a lab. Her room was small. Bed stripped bare, closet empty, but the floorboards near the window were loose. I pried one up and found a narrow metal box beneath it, lid-lined, heavy, sealed with a rotating clasp. Inside were documents, maybe 200 pages, tightly packed into folders. Most were biometric readouts, heart rates, EEG patterns, hormone levels labeled only with alphanumeric tags and dates, but a few had names. Mine was one of them, Garrett Lowell, indexed with a photo of me sleeping, time-stamped from 2 weeks before the attack. The angle matched my bedroom layout exactly. I checked the metadata on the back: infrared lens, non-consumer format, government issue or close to it. There were also logs handwritten, then transcribed and printed. Notes about my sleep cycle, behavioral responses, dietary intake, It read like a case study. They weren't just watching me. They were analyzing, prepping. I found pages detailing interactions between the subject and Seven to see. That was her, Evelyn, or whatever she was. The logs suggested she was the initiator of contact. My role was observation response, a behavioral stressor in a controlled environment. One note stood out. Subject displays minimal resistance. Compatible. Markers present. Schedule phase 2 trigger. The date next to it matched the night she entered my closet. I took as many files as I could and resealed the box. Then I left the way I came, walking slowly in the dark, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Whatever this was, it hadn't ended. It had just been paused. The files led to a company that no longer existed, on paper. I scanned every page. I'd taken from the lockbox. Most of the files were technical raw data, chemical notations, obscure references to neurological thresholds. But tucked into one of the folders was a printed logo, a black triangle intersected by 3 curved lines, like a radar sweep frozen mid-pulse. Beneath it, one word, Ravenex. I ran a search through public databases and got nothing. No business filings, no trademarks, no contact information. But a deeper dig through an academic journal archive turned up a congressional report from 12 years ago. It mentioned Ravenex by name, identifying it as a subcontractor involved in classified neural interface trials for a defense consortium. The report was vague, full of redactions and legal disclaimers, but one phrase stood out: voluntary field exposure in off-grid environments. The program was supposedly dissolved after an ethics inquiry, but there was no follow-up. Number, termination records, just silence. I checked the address listed in the original filing. It pointed to a P.O. box in Mariposa, just outside town. That wasn't a coincidence. When I traced that box to its payment account, it linked back to the housing management company that ran our Cop Yosemite Ridge Initiative, LLC. On paper, it looked like a generic real estate trust, but it had no leasing office, no employee listings, and no other known properties. The deeper I searched, the more the pieces fit. The COPE wasn't just off-grid, it was off-record, a closed loop, isolated and controlled. The perfect environment. For a test site, I pulled property maps, county infrastructure records, anything I could get my hands on. The utilities routed to our 3 houses were split from a separate feeder line, not connected to the main grid. Electrical activity spiked at irregular intervals, mostly between 2 and 4 a.m. right when the signal on my recorder was strongest. No other student housing showed anything like it. This wasn't a university oversight or a leasing fluke. It was deliberate. Someone had reactivated a blacklisted contractor under a shell company and installed it in plain sight. I thought back to the list in the cabinet, the names, the word returned. If this was a program, then the woman in House 3 wasn't the anomaly. She was the prototype. The woman from House 3 wasn't crazy. She was the result of years of covert research, and I was next. I found him through an online forum buried in a sub-channel about military subcontractor vetting. His handle was low activity, mostly silent, but he had commented once about Ravenex, saying they'd run wet field trials without consent. I sent a message, not expecting a reply, but he responded the next day. Meet in person, no phones, no recordings, you'll understand why. We met in the back of a bookstore cafe in Merced. His name wasn't real, but he introduced himself as a former security technician for Programma Schulaini, an internal coding name for Ravenex's cognitive Integration project. He looked tired, like someone who had carried a secret too long. He confirmed everything. The COP was one of several test zones set up during the early 2000s. Most were dissolved after the investigation, but some programs, especially ones showing crossover viability, continued unofficially. I asked what that meant. He explained that the project wasn't just about surveillance or behavioral modeling. It was about compatibility, human-alien interface testing. The term he used was neural. Entre Mensch, a process where low-frequency pulses condition the brain to accept non-human cognitive structures. I told him about the signal, the glitches, the photos. He nodded. They didn't pick you at random, he said. You fit the profile. Isolated, adaptable, no close ties. That woman, she was an early phase hybrid. They called her 7 to C. Most didn't last that long. He told me the hybrids weren't fully aware of their condition. They weren't mind-controlled, but altered, grafted with traits, instincts, sensory changes. Some deteriorated. Others stabilized but lost identity. Evelyn had been considered a partial success. Her task was to monitor, influence, and initiate. My reactions were part of the protocol. If I hadn't resisted in the closet, the program would have escalated. Phase 2, he said, usually ends with full behavioral submission or psychological collapse. You broke the loop. That's rare. I asked him why he was telling me this. He looked at me with something like regret. Because they won't. Stop. You've been activated now. You've seen too much. They'll either erase you quietly or fold you back in. I left the meeting with a single thought. I hadn't escaped the program. I had become its variable. I didn't go public to be believed. Did it so they couldn't erase me quietly. I spent 3 days organizing the files into a digital archive. I redacted nothing. Every biometric log, every surveillance record, every detail about 7 to C, and the RavenX program was included. I uploaded the documents to a secure server and shared the link through anonymous accounts across multiple forums. Then I sent the archive directly to 3 journalists known for covering defense oversights. I attached one message. The university COPE was a live test site. This is what they did there. You'll find my name in the logs. I didn't use my real name. I knew better than that. The response was immediate. Within 48 hours, the story had traction. One outlet confirmed the P.O. Box links to the housing company. Another traced the leasing firm's tax records to a shell company previously tied to low-visibility DOD contracts. Then came the university's press release, generic, full of denials. They acknowledged a review of off-campus housing oversight, but claimed no knowledge of any testing or government involvement. That same week, bulldozers arrived. The COP was leveled without notice. Students were relocated. No media were allowed on site. The press was told the area had failed structural safety reviews. I've moved twice since. I don't keep a phone. My laptop runs off a flash boot OS that wipes after every session. I only access public Wi-Fi through modified MAC addresses. I'm not running because I'm paranoid. I'm running because the man from Merst was right. Once you've been profiled by a black program, you don't go back to normal. You're either absorbed or eliminated. I never heard from Evelyn again. I assume she was transferred or terminated. But I still hear the signals sometimes. Not through electronics, through dreams. A low hum, steady and patient. Like it's waiting for something. Maybe exposure didn't stop the program, but it changed the terms. They can't erase me without confirming it's all true. So I keep moving, I keep publishing, and I keep listening, because if they come back, I won't be caught in the dark again. This time, they'll know I'm already awake.